On today's episode of the podcast, you are going to fall in love with Nitika Chopra. For those of you who don't know her, she's the founder of Chronicon, which is this huge global community that sets up events and conferences to celebrate how people out there with chronic illnesses have learned to thrive in their lives. And she's truly just amazing. All of her work is special. You have to check out her social platforms. You have to listen to her podcast called Thriving Together. But today's episode of our show is actually focused on something a little bit different and a little more related to Nitika's personal life, which is her somewhat recent decision in her 40s to live her life child-free. So I was a guest on her podcast recently, and this topic came up. She started asking me about motherhood. And I knew this would make an amazing podcast episode for our show because the topic of whether or not to have kids is such a personal one. And it's rare to have two people who are at very different life stages and have made very different life choices coming together to discuss this topic so openly with one another and really with so much respect. The conversation goes in so many different directions in this interview. We hear a lot about how her chronic illnesses have played a role in this choice to live child-free, and also some of my honest thoughts about someone's decision to not have kids. And some of these thoughts are thoughts I've never said out loud before, but they did lead to a very fascinating conversation. I absolutely love bringing people on this show to talk about taboo topics like this that I feel like aren't discussed often in public, or at least I guess I would describe them as the topics that are a little bit harder to ask people about in normal day-to-day life and conversation, because they are topics that can be tricky or sensitive. You don't want to cross boundaries. But the whole point of this show is breaking down those boundaries and crossing them and seeing where they lie and seeing kind of how far we can push it to get into really deep conversations and get to the real stuff. So I hope you enjoy listening to this episode with Nitika. As always, please head over to Apple Podcasts, tap write a review. All of the reviews that you've sent in have been so sweet. We love hearing all of your thoughts on our guests and our topics. If you screenshot your review and you DM it over to us on Instagram, I will send you a personalized voice message as a thank you for taking the time to do that for us. It means the world to us to have your feedback and to have you guys be active participants in this series. I'm loving every minute of hosting this podcast, and I cannot wait to dive into today's juicy conversation with the sweetest soul in the world, Nitika Chopra.
I just did like a 30-minute TikTok veg sesh where I just like let myself scroll on TikTok and not think about the 700 things that I really could have been doing with this 30 minutes. But it makes me feel so recharged, just whatever that thing is. For some people, it's not social media, but for me, TikTok is so entertaining that I just feel like I need to power fully down so that I can be fully on with you, because I was so excited to chat with you.
I love that because, I've heard a lot of creators talk about getting sucked down those TikTok spirals as being a negative for their mental health.
Yeah.
It seems like you have found a way to just be entertained by it.
Well, TikTok in particular, I think I'm just not attached to it. There's no value or worth connected to like my personal experience at all. I'm just like, what is this like wild dating story that I'm going to hear about? Or what is this like sweet grandparent that's going to have an amazing moment? Like I don't know, it's fun for me.
Yeah, I do feel like TikTok from the very start, like one of the reasons I actually agreed to use it when people were trying to convince me to was that almost every video I was served was entertaining to me. How do you feel about it maybe going away?
I was just talking to someone about that yesterday. I think I'm still in denial about it. It feels like the prospect of it going away has come and gone like 6 times over since it started. And so I think I will probably be very upset if that happens, but I'm just kind of pretending like it's not happening for now. I feel like the fact that you've built YouTube for so long and it's like so consistent and such a great audience on there, I do get the sense that that's where everyone sort of tells you to go. So you're a leg up, Lucie. I wouldn't worry.
Oh, thank you. Well, Nitika, welcome to The Real Stuff. So excited to finally have you here. And for today's chat, I really want to dive in deep to your decision to live a child-free life. This is a topic that we haven't had a guest come on yet to share about. And I know you've been very open. You've written blogs, articles, all about this, and I really just want to hear everything. But before we get into that decision, I feel like it's kind of inextricably linked in a way to your chronic illness and chronic illnesses of the past and your whole life's journey. So, before we get into the child free choice, can you just talk a little bit about your upbringing and anything you're open to sharing in regards to your illnesses?
Of course. First of all, I also just want to out myself and say I'm kind of nervous right now.
No.
Like, it's good nervous, but it's like, you like really on this podcast, you leave no stone unturned. So I was like kind of, prepping, like, okay, all right, Nitika, you gotta bring your A game. No, it's like good nervous. It's like that like anticipatory, like, ooh, like what is gonna happen here? Which is not typical when you do a podcast. And we actually talked about this when you were on my show. You kind of feel like it's the same 6 to 10
Mhm.
questions, but yeah, anyway, so I just wanted to say that. So yeah, I got my first chronic illness when I was 10 years old, and that is psoriasis. And that is an autoimmune condition which appears on your skin. It creates a lot of times like scales that are itchy. They itch like chicken pox. They can bleed. It looks a little different depending on the type of psoriasis that you have, but for me, it was thick red and sometimes even white patches. And the thing about my condition or my case of psoriasis is that I ended up getting it from the tip of my foot to the tip of my head within pretty much a year of
Wow.
getting the condition. So a lot of times when people think of psoriasis, they think of, oh, I've seen that, commercial on TV, or like my aunt has some of that like in her scalp or maybe on like her elbow. And that is frustrating and challenging in its own right. It's never to take that away, but I definitely had a case that was severe, very debilitating. The skin alone made it hard for me to walk without severe pain. When I was 19, about a decade into that diagnosis, I ended up getting psoriatic arthritis. So they are linked. I'm not a doctor, just that disclaimer for anything we discuss today. I'm not a doctor. I know more about living with chronic illnesses than I know about anything, but from the patient's perspective. And so I kind of always say psoriasis is like inflammation of the skin. Psoriatic arthritis is like inflammation of the joints. There's many different types of arthritis, and my particular kind was a special place in hell. I'm not gonna lie, it was so painful.
Oh.
It felt like like there was like a truck like running over me, like that kind of pain that I felt. And I got that when I was 19. So it basically for the first half of my 20s, it left me unable to move and do much. I couldn't get a job. I was very, very, very debilitated. And yeah, and so that just, I mean, I lived like that from the start of the psoriasis to, things actually finally taking a turn with getting the right medications and things. I lived like that for like 17 years of my life. So it was a very significant part of my life.
When you're 9 and someone tells you that you have a chronic illness and you just find out that the way you feel right now or whatever you're dealing with right now is going to go on for the rest of your life, what does that do to you emotionally?
Yeah. So I remember when we got the diagnosis, like it's like a memory in my cellular memory. Like I can feel it in my body when I think about it. And I just remember I had to go get like a skin biopsy, which happens often, if you've got a condition, they're not sure what it is. They thought maybe it was eczema, like they were a little unsure. And then I remember my mom getting the phone call that it was psoriasis. And I just remember like panic in the house. I didn't know what it meant. You know what I mean? I didn't understand. I couldn't like pull it all together. I didn't know that the next 17 years were going to be riddled with this kind of challenge, but I felt the panic in the house. I felt like something was just changed, and I felt like something was now like very wrong. I was always like the black sheep in the family. I was always very different in every single way, whether it's because I was like curvier and everyone in my family is like lanky and straight, and I was never lanky and straight. I also have like curly, wavy hair. Literally, no one in my family knows where my hair came from. It's like all like every layer was always just like, who are you? Like, how come you're this way? And I think emotionally, also, I come from, am Indian, so my parents have a much more traditional way of raising us, which I think is beautiful, but as a kid, I did not think it was beautiful. I thought it was really frustrating. I was in America for the most part. We were overseas when I was really little, but for the most part, I was in America. And yeah, I just always questioned everything. I just always wanted to know why. If I felt like something was off, I said it, which in a traditional Indian home, you're really supposed to be more demure, more quiet, more in line. And I was like, I see your line and I'm going to draw all over it. you know? So, yeah.
What would you say was the time in your life when this chronic illness was at its peak and just flaring up at the worst?
Yeah. I think when I got psoriatic arthritis and I was 19, I think that was like very much a turning point like a tipping point for me. I was in college and I remember trying to open, the inside of like the cereal box, like the bag of cereal,
Mhm.
and I couldn't open it. My hands wouldn't move and I didn't understand like what was going on, and my parents were living in Hong Kong at the time and I was very alone. I felt like, oh my god, like I was going to school in Connecticut for the first 2 years of college. And yeah, it felt again like very emotionally overwhelming. But then my bones like rapidly started to deform and become more and more immobile. And my doctor, several years later, when I finally found the right doctor, he had said if I hadn't started medication, I would have been completely immobile by the time I was 30. Yeah, so it was around that time that I felt like, oh, it's like a tipping point right now. My skin was already so bad. It was hard for me to move because of the skin, not because of the joints. And then when I added the arthritis on top of that, it felt like too much, to be honest with you. I was like, I hear you. I get that you think I'm real strong, but like, could you just tone it down on the life lessons? Like, this is a little too much for me.
Was that the time in your life, I think I read you posted about having lost 40 pounds and being unable to swallow?
Oh gosh. Okay. Those were two different times actually. So I would say I lost like 25 pounds over the course of many different times throughout my health journey because I was always told to go on these like, kind of radical eating plans, you could say, for my health. And now I don't subscribe to any of that because I just feel like it actually messed up my hormones and like made things so irregular in other ways that had nothing to do with my chronic illnesses. A couple of years ago in 2021, I actually got COVID and I ended up triggering a rare neuromuscular disease from getting a really severe case of COVID. And so that's technically my third chronic illness. It's called myasthenia gravis. And I spent the first 6 months when I didn't know it was happening. I couldn't walk. I mean, sorry, I couldn't smile. I'm like, the couldn't walk was another time. I couldn't smile. I couldn't swallow. I also had double vision, so I couldn't see properly. And the way that I would describe it was like, it felt like my brain was sort of short circuiting. Like, I didn't know it was wrong. And I went to the mall with my mom one day and I started crying and just had to leave because of just like the lights and nothing was happening that was like out of the ordinary. It was just too much for my body at the time. So I ended up getting a test that had me find out that I had this disease. But at that time, I was put on steroids and it made me gain 40 pounds in 3 months. So there's a lot of facts, that
Wow.
go into the story. But yeah.
I think a lot of people that have a chronic illness or even an acute illness that's really dire, they sometimes, maybe as a coping mechanism, say to themselves that this was given to them for a reason, or there's a lesson they're learning out of it, or they kind of come up with some silver lining. Have you felt like this has been a gift in your life, or are you really just like, what the fuck? Why is this happening to me?
I would say I am more in the first category, but there's a caveat. So, like, a lot of what the work that I do is about is like, it's yes and. I know that because I went through some of the most horrific things as a kid, that I have empathy that runs very deep. I know I also see people way beyond their physical appearance and what they show me in real life and what I can see with my eyes. I also know so much about me has just been rewired because I had to rewire my system over and over and over and over again through this conversation and relationship with my body. And I'm actually like proud of that. I'm proud of, I wouldn't say like necessarily, oh, it's a gift. Like, I don't know if I use those words, but I'm proud of the fact that when I was brought to my knees over and over and over again, my response was, okay, what can I do? And it has been horrible a lot of the time. I'm like, yeah, maybe at like 4 p.m. when I'm talking to Lucie, I'm doing great. And then maybe at 6 p.m. when it's the end of my day, I am in pain or I'm experiencing severe fatigue that is debilitating at at that moment.
And we will get into a little bit about how you have sort of turned this mess into your message. But first, where I want to take this is, correct me if I'm wrong, when you were in your 20s, you were married and
Yeah.
then divorced.
Yeah.
Can you take me back to that first relationship, however much you're comfortable sharing? I would love to hear how that marriage was. I understand it was during a time when you were physically at a very low point. Your thought process behind maybe having children in that marriage, and if that was maybe a factor in the marriage ending.
Yes, I was married when I was 20. I got married, and I don't talk about this that often, but I'm not afraid to talk about it. It's more like, okay, is it relevant? And I think for the conversation around children, it is. I got married in New Delhi in India. It was not an arranged marriage, which is usually people's next question. It was a love marriage, and I was madly in love. I was more in love so far than I've ever been in my life, and I knew that we were going to be together forever. And that's why I said yes. That's why I went for it. And he was older than me, but I really felt like I knew what I was doing. And to be honest with you, I still feel that way, even though it didn't end the way that I thought it would. I know that the version of me that said yes would say yes again, to be honest, because it was the genuine truth at the moment. We had a great relationship. And then one day he basically just kind of switched. And I was visiting my parents in Hong Kong at the time. And he called me and said he didn't want to be obligated to be a husband anymore. He was
Called
going,
you.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. I am so sorry that that happened and that it was over the telephone. That is
Yeah. It's,
absolutely wild.
it was very devastating. And I was so young. Like by the time that had come up in our relationship, I was 23. I didn't have the tools, to navigate something like that. So I left my trip early and I like hyperventilated all the way back to New York and sort of said, we had never even like fought before. It
Yeah, I
wasn't
was going to ask if the marriage was in good standing leading up to that.
I thought it was. And I mean, we had a conversation before I had left where we talked about like he's an entrepreneur, so he was like super busy with work and we had spent so much time together for so many years, but then like all of a sudden he was spending less time and very preoccupied. So that was one conversation that we had had of like, hey, when I come back, like we should reset and like let's get back into like our routines together kind of thing. But it wasn't like, you know, like throw in the towel kind of stuff. It was like
Right.
a little friction. And then yeah, and then that happened and then I came home and I basically was like, we've never even fought before. Like I love you enough to try to figure this out and see. And then I spent the next year going to marriage counseling by myself because he wouldn't go. And I like hired a life coach and I hired him a life coach because I was like, maybe he'll do that. And he never showed up for the sessions or did any of it. And then when I was 24, I was like, okay, I'm done. This is not going to change. It took me a really long time to get over that. And I think in some ways, I don't know if you ever really do get over something like that, to be totally honest. But the kids aspect of things, I was so sick when we were together. So it wasn't something that was like in the forefront. I also was so young. So I wasn't like thinking about that aspect of my life. Like, it wasn't constantly on my mind or anything like that. But I also remember thinking, it like obviously like we would just have kids. Like that's what people do. So like I just assumed, like we would at some point.
Do you remember ever broaching that topic with him?
We actually like didn't really talk about it. I just remember thinking about it in my own mind. Like I remember when I was going through the whole process of trying to figure out if I wanted kids or not, I remember thinking back to my relationship with him and being like, "Oh, I just assumed we would have kids. We just never got to that place." Because again, I was sick and I was really young. So, and even getting married, I had never been like obsessed with getting married. That's not why I got married at 20. I just fell in love with someone and knew that I wanted to marry him. So that's why I got
Mhm.
married, you know? So yeah, I think after when I started to, assess my own desires and like the way I wanted to kind of live beyond this marriage and with other relationships, I realized that I just assumed we would have kids and I never really thought about, do I even want that? Is like, what does that even mean for me? What does that mean for my life, for my body, for my relationships, all of that? It was just kind of an automatic thing I think I was assuming that I would do.
It sounds like a divorce like that must be pretty traumatic and must leave you with a lot of, I don't know what the word is, uncertainty about future partners and just potential abandonment at any time. Wondering if you ever got any sort of answers from him about the switch that was flipped, and or if there was ever a part of you that kind of blamed yourself and blamed your chronic illnesses and felt like maybe that was too much for him, or maybe that was part of it.
Yeah, that's a great question. I did get answers just in the most way that he could give them to me. I think he also doesn't totally know why that happened the way that it did for him. And then in terms of like the chronic illness aspect, you know, sometimes I think about that and I'm like, I feel like I should think that this was too much or, because it was a lot. It was a lot. Especially the psoriasis, it's a very almost like in your face kind of thing when you have psoriasis very severely. It flakes, it's messy, it can bleed. Like it's not just visually challenging. It is physically, and then you're sharing space with somebody, they are impacted by that, right? So I think about that. But I don't think that is not the reason why
Mhm.
we didn't work. Yeah, I think he knew exactly what he was getting into before we started dating. It wasn't a surprise to him. It was something he had known. I'd known him for many, many years before we started dating. So yeah, I don't think that that had an impact.
Well, that's good to hear. I'm
Yeah.
happy to hear that answer.
Yeah.
Today's episode of The Real Stuff is sponsored by Dreamland Baby, which is one of our favorite baby brands and the absolute softest pajamas that Milo has been wearing ever since he was a newborn. They are so silky and so soft. They're made of bamboo, and they really only get softer with each wash. So our next baby is honestly even luckier than Milo was. So far, these pajamas have been great for us at every single stage. So he started off wearing those full body onesies, the ones with the zipper and the little dream cuffs that can flip over to cover his hands and feet. Personally love that they're zippers. Any parent out there will tell you, get zipper footies for your newborns. It is the move with babies, makes it so easy to change diapers. And he's now into their 2-piece toddler pajama sets. Every single night, we let Milo pick out his pajamas before bed, and he goes through his drawers and he's constantly reaching for the Dreamland sets because he knows they're the coziest, they're the stretchiest. They also have the best color options and the cutest patterns. If you are looking for the coziest pajamas for babies and toddlers, go to dreamlandbabyco.com and enter my code, all caps, real stuff at checkout to get 30% off their pajamas and also free shipping. This offer is for new customers and existing customers, so even if you've shopped there before, you can all head to dreamlandbabyco.com. Code REALSTUFF gets you 30% off plus free shipping. Now I want to go to when you're in your 30s and you kind of make that ultimate decision when for years you kind of didn't know and you lived in your 20s thinking you probably would have kids, but now I think you're 31 and what happens?
Yeah. So I dated somebody after my divorce that I had known since I was 19, actually, since I was in college. And I always say he was like my first love because he was the president of the fraternity at my college. And he was like so not a quintessential president of a fraternity. Like, he never drank alcohol, and he was like the nicest, kindest person on the planet. So obviously, I was like, he is my husband. Um, so I thought he was so nice and so great. And anyway, we dated for like a couple of years. I loved him, but I wasn't in love with him, which I say in a disappointing tone because I wish I had been, to be honest. He was so wonderful. And so I kind of knew that we probably wouldn't end up together. I kind of had this feeling, you date someone and you're like, oh, they're not really like my person, but like we'll date. So I didn't think that that was such a big deal because I had told myself I would never get married again. I was like in that phase of things, like, screw this. I'm never doing that again. Like, this is not happening. And then when I was 31, I actually forget the name of the song, but Colby Calais has this song. I think it's called I Do or something, actually. The whole time she's saying, like, I want to meet your family. I want you to meet my family. It's like really sweet. Okay, you should totally look it up. And I was like, holy crap, I want to do that. I want to do that with someone. So that had me decide that I needed to break up with this person, which was actually messier than my divorce. It was a messy, messy breakup. And then, to be honest with you, from like 31, I would say until like 38, I went back and forth 100 times about having kids or not having kids.
I guess this all started when you weren't even in an active relationship. You were just trying to decide what your future would look like.
Yes. I wanted to know for me, like, what do I want? Right. And anytime I met a cute guy who wanted kids, I was like, oh, I think I want kids. And then anytime I met somebody who didn't want kids or I wasn't in a relationship, that was like the biggest tell, I didn't want kids. And I noticed after a while, I was like, oh, I've actually never made this decision for me. I would always say it's because of, like, I was on a medication for a long time that caused ectopic pregnancy. So you couldn't, they don't advise you to get pregnant while you're on this medication, of course. So I had always said, oh, I can't get pregnant. I can't have kids. But I had never really claimed it for myself and said, no, Nitika does not want to have children. That is not her body's path. It was really, really hard. And yeah, I finally, after many years, did some soul searching with myself and was like, oh no, this is just my decision. I don't think my body wants me to carry a child. And I don't think my body would handle that well. I think that would actually be really disruptive. It already is disruptive for somebody that has no autoimmune issues. And it's not necessarily in a negative way. It's just, it changes you, as you know, way better than I do. Again, that's not a negative thing. It's just what your body has to go through in order to be able to hold this child and create this beautiful being. And my body is like hanging on by a thread half the time. So I'm just like, she is not prepared to like grow a whole human.
So that people are oriented with this timeline. How old are you now?
I just turned 43.
Okay, so this was well over 10 years ago
Yeah.
when you're making this decision. At this point in your life, were you surrounded by a lot of friends and family members that had babies and you were an active part of other kids' lives and kind of got to see what was maybe in store for you if you chose to have kids?
Not really. I didn't have a lot of, I mean, I live in, Manhattan. I didn't really have a lot of friends that had kids when I was in my early to mid 30s. I had one friend who I always say she has 100 children because she has 3 kids. And I'm just like, you might as well have 100. It's like, there's no middle ground. I've sort of always been like the auntie to all their kids. And that's the thing. I love being what I call, well, not what I call, in my culture, we say Masi when it's the mother's sister. It's like, Nitika Masi or, Lucie Masi. That's actually so cute. And so all of my friends now that have kids, their kids call me Nitty Masi because my close friends call me Nitty. Yeah. So, but at the time, I didn't have a lot of friends that had kids. But for some reason, I just kind of knew that it would be a big job.
As it is.
Like the biggest job of all time.
When you're going back and forth and going on dates and kind of changing your mind and then flipping back when you're single, Did you ever make the decision to do something like freeze your eggs in case you would maybe want to do this at a later stage in life, kind of set yourself up to be able to?
No, probably should have been a sign that I really
Yeah.
want to have children. But no, I never even considered it. I think anytime, I think about, you have to get hormones or I don't know like the ins and outs, but like when you're doing something like freezing your eggs, it's again, it's invasive in a lot of ways. And so anything that had to do with something that would be that way, I just knew like this bod is not signing up for anything
Yes.
extra. Doesn't need any like extracurricular activities.
As a person who has kids and has another on the way, or has a kid and has another on the way, I do know firsthand how difficult it can be and, all the potential drawbacks. And I'm always curious from the point of view of someone who doesn't have kids, if they were going to explain to someone why they've chosen to be child free, what their reasons are. And you obviously have some extenuating circumstances with your medical history. But can you just share what are all the thoughts that go through your mind when you think about why you don't want to do this?
Yeah, okay, those are harder thoughts to share. I'm not gonna lie.
And you can share them all and don't feel like because I have a kid, you have to hold back. Just to put them all out there.
Okay, Lucy, taking our friendship to the next level. Let's go. One of them is definitely it's still connected to my health, but I always felt like my health was my first child because it was the thing that I had to factor in for every decision I've ever made since I was 10 years old.
Mhm.
Which from the sense that I get about being a parent, that is what you do when you have a child. You have to say, oh, is my kid going to be okay? Where's my child going to be? Are they going to have food? Are they going to have enough energy? Are they going to be safe? To me, whether it was like wanting to study abroad for school and knowing I couldn't physically do that because of the medication that I needed and it was so complicated and like health insurance, it was like every step of the way was never what does Nitika want to do? It was always like, what does her health need?
Mm.
So I was like, oh, hell no. Because I know I don't do anything halfway. Okay. So if I'm going to be a mom, I'm going to, join the party like 150 million percent, And so I just felt like, no, 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 no. I can't. Cause then again, it'll be not me first. And then I do also feel like, which this one might be like influenced by all the other ones, but I think the way that it feels in my mind is sort of like, I guess maybe I'm nervous to say this out loud, but like I think of Oprah. Okay. And she doesn't have kids. And she's also like a mother in her life. Very motherly, very nurturing. And she also has a school with her daughter girls, I think she calls them. And that resonated with me so deeply. I've always wanted to have an orphanage in India or school in India where I'm giving back to especially young girls, helping build confidence, all of that. I know that it's not like if you have a child, you can't also do that. But I think there was something for me personally where I felt like I don't have the capacity to do all of the things.
Can we talk a little bit about the experience of telling the people in your life, namely your parents and your close friends, about this decision you had made? What was everyone's reaction like?
Yeah, so I was mostly afraid to tell my mom, being a South Asian mom, like it feels like there's a lot of pressure to fit all the molds and do all the things. But I had never fit any molds. So I also had that going for me. Like it wasn't a huge surprise that this was another thing I was going to say I'm not
Add
doing.
it to the
Like,
list.
yeah, add it to the list. But I remember it was my brother, my mom, and my dad. We went to, I think it was like the Brandy Library in New York. And we were just hanging out. And I don't know why, but for some reason that day I decided to tell them that I was not going to have children, that I decided not to have children. And I was waiting for like, just devastation to come over their faces. And that is not at all what happened. I do also think it was partly because I was only telling them once I was really sure, or at least more sure than I had ever been. I did not go to them with the question. My mom looked at me and she said, I think that's a smart decision.
Hmm.
And she said that because she knows what my body's been through. And so she was just like, I understand why you feel that way. And I think that's the right decision for you. Because I think she had always been afraid at the idea of me having a child for my physical health. And then my dad said, having kids is one of the hardest things that anyone can ever do. If you're not sure, you should not have them. And I was like, okay, Dad, did we traumatize you much? I was like, but I was surprised because that's actually like a very liberal, progressive way to talk about these kinds of things.
Yeah.
And, coming from my background, I was really surprised.
Was this reaction something that gave you relief, or was there a sense of, did you almost want them to push back so that you could think it through some more, or were you really set?
I was really set, but I think it felt a little anticlimactic. I had built this conversation up in my head for so long. I can't remember exactly how long, but for a long time. So I think I thought every conversation that I have with my parents is like, it can be challenging. Like we have such different views and opinions on so many things. And so I was expecting, some like, yeah, a little bit of a fight, a little bit of a push, but no, they were like, thank you, God.
And what about friends, particularly friends that had kids of their own and maybe wanted you to join in the ranks?
Yeah, I think all my friends, like no one was surprised. Like the friend of mine who has, 100 kids, 100, same thing. She was like, Nitika, you've never wanted kids. You've just felt guilty about it. It's true. It's like I just felt like I was supposed to want kids, and like everybody else wants them. And also like the number one thing that people say is usually like, well, what's going to happen to you? Who's going to take care of you when you are old? And I was like, I actually do not have a good answer for that. I have no idea. My one of my best friends, I started this group. It's like with literally 3 people, so I don't know if it really qualifies as a group, but we call ourselves Waka, which means without child and wild. And literally, when we go somewhere where we're overstimulated by children, we will send the Waka symbol to a group. Oh my God, it's
What's
so
the
great.
symbol?
It's just like all caps Waka
Waka.
in like as many letters, like Waka, like as many W's as we can. And yeah, and it's like it's just a deep knowing.
I kind of hate the reasoning for having kids of who's going to take care of you. That's just always been something I don't resonate with. I don't like the idea of reproducing just so that someone can care for you. I do want to share with you one of my primary reasons for having wanted to have kids, and I would love to hear maybe you just don't feel this at all.
Mhm.
The thought of having kids, and it was confirmed for me once I had them, felt like I was embarking and engaging in almost this human experience that everyone that has come before us that has reproduced the next generations has gone through. And it was almost like joining this collective of ancestors. And I felt this deep connection upon giving birth. I felt this deep connection to all the women who had come before me from the caveman era through to today, and all the future mothers and people that would birth the next generation. And it just felt like this human experience that if I'm having this limited time on earth and I want to experience the full range of humanity and the full range of emotions, that this was an important piece of that. And I'm curious if you just, that doesn't cross your mind. Maybe you don't feel that at all.
I think I have my own version. And again, I'm not a mother, so I can't speak to what your experience was. But for me, what that brings up for me is, when I think of the lineage in my family, I think of the lineage of women who have had chronic illnesses in my family, because there's
Mm.
actually been many women. And I think of the fact that all of those illnesses have been autoimmune diseases, and that is typically a sign of like self-esteem challenges, not really believing in ourselves, also physiological things. I'm not saying it's only that, right? But this is like the wiring a lot of times. And there's a burden, again, like we were talking about with my story, there's a burden that's been carried that then gets carried out into your physical symptoms. So I think about that lineage. And I think about, oh, what was my nani ma, who's my mom's mom? What was she going through? That led her body to break down to the place where she got such a debilitating illness. And how did I bring that into this world too? And what is it about every single breath that I take and every single moment that I'm doing whatever I'm doing during my day that I get to rewire? that lineage, you know? And so I understand why someone would feel like that about having a child, because I totally hear that. And yet knowing that I'm not going to have my own children, I think that's where I think of lineage is like I've known since I was young, since I was like 15, that this journey with my health, I've always believed and I've always felt like I've gotten very divine messages around it, that the message always was that this is not about you. Actually, this is not about you. And it was very hard for me to understand that when I was in such serious and physical pain. But I've always carried out my life from that anchor. That is my
Mhm.
anchor in every single moment that I do anything.
I don't even think I need to say this, but I hope it goes without saying that any questions I'm asking you or anything I'm throwing out there is by no means me attempting to change your mind or in any way feeling like I'm, giving you a better decision to make. I do find it so fascinating that at least a lot of what you've shared so far and any of the reasons why you've maybe kind of gone back in the direction of thinking you might want to have kids, it all seems fear-based and just rooted in the, well, I really want to find a partner. And so maybe I do want that, or maybe I don't want to miss out on that, or, maybe I want someone to take care of me, whatever these reasons are, which to me feels like, as your dad said, not a good enough reason to go through with this huge lifestyle change.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think fear is a good reason to have an entire child.
Entire, maybe half a child.
Maybe a foot. Like I just don't think it is a good enough reason. But see, that is the work, right? Because so many people I know, and I think it happens, I hope at least, I my sense is it maybe happens less now because we're also therapized and talked about, like we talk about things way more than we did when, our parents were having children. But yeah, I think that's the work to be done, right? Is like sitting with yourself, and it's not always going to be easy and like comfy and, all of those things, but at least it's honest. And even like as I've gotten older, I just turned 43. And I think when I hit my 40s, I started to think like, oh, I actually think I'd really be a great stepmom. Like, I think I would really love that role. And I never thought that before. It was like just, I didn't have capacity. But I would love to meet a guy who has his own kids that, maybe I could play a pivotal role in supporting them and loving them and nurturing them in their life. Like
Hmm.
it's not like I hate kids. That's also the other thing. I think people who don't want kids, people assume we hate them. I actually love kids. My nervous system can't handle all the noise sometimes, but I actually think kids are such a gift and such beautiful teachers. So yeah, and then I've also thought like, oh, maybe with the right partner at some point, maybe adopting a kid like would be an amazing thing to do, for someone who really needs that kind of love and support. So, but yeah, just getting to the truth and like knowing yourself enough to be able to make decisions from that honest place, I think is important.
I have another really close friend who's actually my only friend in life aside from you, who has outwardly told me at this stage in her life, and she's in her young 30s, that she doesn't want to have kids. And I mean, almost everything about her life is kind of alternative in that she lives in Greece on an island with her boyfriend. She's very into spirituality, meditation, music. And she's basically told me, to my point previously about this human experience that she might be missing. I do actually, in reflecting on that, I guess I can see how that is a bit of a one track mind and like a very single minded view of what the human experience means and what our lives need to be like. And when I hear from my friend who, I ask her, what does she see? Where does she see herself when she's 60? What is she doing? She wants to be by the sea, hosting a meditation retreat with lots of adults coming, sitting next to her partner, doing a guided meditation. And to her, that is the full embodied experience of humanity and living her fullest expression of her life. And it's almost like, who is to say that there's one path that is being the most human or doing it the right way? I just don't buy into that.
Yeah, I don't either. And I think, it's interesting because we wouldn't think that everybody has to be the exact same in this moment, right? Nobody's saying, "Oh, you live, in a house and I live in an apartment and it shouldn't be that way. You should both live in the same exact kind of place." Like nobody's saying that now, but there's something about it's like that difference can only go so far, I feel, before people get uncomfortable.
Hmm.
you know? And so I think that's so important. First of all, tell your friend when she gets this retreat going, I'm there.
You're on the
Me
list.
me and my partner will be there. One of my mom's friends lives overseas and she doesn't have kids and she's like in her late 60s. She's so cool. She's like,
I feel like everyone that chooses not to have kids is just so cool. What is this pattern?
I don't know. I'll let you know if I ever get cool, but they're they're just so cool. And they're having a great time. They're together, not having kids. But there's no guarantee, right? I could meet the next love of my life tomorrow and I don't know how long he's going to be here, And I know that's true. Like even I have so many people that I know who have siblings that they're not close to or their family is not connected to and all these things. So I mean, I think that's probably the biggest fear, if I want to call it a fear, or the biggest like question mark or concern is like, well, I don't really know. I know one aunt that can show me, that like this could be an option. Whereas for people who want to have kids, in all different ways, right? There seems to be a lot more evidence to how you're supposed to or how you can make that work.
Maybe you can be that model. Don't forget about Oprah.
Right. That's
Yes.
true.
But maybe you can be that guiding light for anyone listening in the younger generations who feel the same way. To your point about yes, and when you were talking about chronic illnesses, something that I don't even know if I've said out loud, but here we are. I'm going to say it. I feel a sense of yes, and on this topic, in that I think two things can be true at once. And I absolutely feel extremely happy with my decision to have kids and so in love with my first child, and I know I will be with the second, and I've always wanted to have them, and it's good and I'm happy. And I have to be honest, I feel a simultaneous sense of slight jealousy of people who declare that they're not going to do this.
So you're saying you're jealous of me?
so so you think you're really pretty. I feel as simultaneous at the same moment and in the same breath as I'm
Yeah.
looking in my son's eyes and hugging him, which to me, there is a part of it that sounds terrible because it's almost like, well, would you wish he wasn't here? Do you want him to poof disappear? No. But I do look at people like my friend and like you, and I think of their lives and I think of specifically their right now and also their futures in a way. And I just think, wow, what a different path. What different things could I be doing? Would I be doing? I definitely talk to my husband a lot about how we both feel a slight sense of regret about not having lived somewhere else together before we chose to have our son in New York. And honestly, in hindsight, it's not our fault that we didn't do that because COVID hit and all this work from home stuff happened. And then we decided to get pregnant right around then. It's only like now, in hindsight, we both work from home and we both have these really flexible jobs where it would be great right now if we were living somewhere else. But now we have the child and we're not going to take him away from his grandparents and family. And they're very much a big part of his life and supporting us. So we don't really want to go anywhere with him now, but we keep saying, should have done that before. We didn't really have a big enough window when working from home was an option, but we feel a little sense of regret over that. And it's too bad it's over. We keep saying, we'll live somewhere else when our children go to college. So we're almost living for 20 years in the future when we can go live out those tropical dreams on an island somewhere. And hopefully it happens. But I don't know. I definitely feel just this slight looking at someone like you and looking at my friend and feeling like, huh.
I mean, thank you for saying that. I think it's a beautiful thing to be able to honor that it can be both, like we
Yes.
started the conversation. I have a version of that. And I wouldn't call it jealousy because to me, that goes to the point of I want what you have. Like I'm upset because I don't have what you have, right? But to me, I think it's very slight difference, but like a little bit more like envy.
Hmm.
Like I envy that, oh, now you have this unit. You have these like companions, Because that's really the thing that I probably long for, crave the most is like that companionship, that consistent companionship, especially because my parents are in their 70s and I know that they're not going to be here forever. So I'm kind of like, well, what the hell is going to happen? Like, what happens then? I envy that. I know that I'm not meant to have a child, but I do envy that at times, for sure.
It's a good way to put it, because I guess that's exactly how I would put it. I love having a child, and I'm happy that I have this family that I've built, yet I envy your freedom, your flexibility, your me time, your self-care time,
Yeah.
your choice to run out on a whim and go for a walk at night. I remember after having Milo, one of the biggest changes in my life was that Michael and I used to always go for night walks around New York City, and all of a sudden we couldn't leave the apartment together, and so we were kind of landlocked and just stuck inside. And there was one night when we said, you know what? He's asleep. We have our monitor. Let's just go for a loop around the block together. If he starts crying, we will run home. We won't be more than, I don't know, 1,000 feet away from him. And we had our phones out, and he had been on a streak of not crying. So we were like, this is going to be fine. We're going to leave and he's not going to make a noise. We get outside and we get around the block and he starts crying. And
Oh,
Michael's
wow.
like, I'll sprint home. And he turns around, starts running. And thankfully, I think he stopped and calmed down. But it was just one of those moments of like, you try to get a break, you try to get away, you try to make it all work. And you're like pulled back to reality. No, this is your life now. And if you want to go out for a walk, you need a babysitter or you need to figure something else out. So I think envy is a good word. There's a lot of things that you lose when you have kids. And then obviously, there are a lot of things gained. And it's just a back and forth, push and pull.
Yeah, and I do also always just try to remember, like, and I know you know this, but like, it's almost like how it feels when you're looking at people on social media where you do just see like one note of them, So we might see, and not because people are being fake, but just because it's way cuter when their kid is eating something funny versus like crying and pooping its pants on the floor. Like it's not trying to be fake. Like you're just like, it's one is a little bit more Instagrammable than the other. So yeah, I think that's also something I try to think about too is like, oh, this I envy this part because this looks really sweet and really nice. And I'm sure there are things that are really challenging about it.
I was going to ask if social media ever plays into your emotions, simply because even people who are just, do want kids but are not at that stage yet, there's a lot of talk about people seeing people on social media who are at milestones in life and stages ahead of them, and the whole realm of social media making them feel jealous or envious or depressed or upset about their own situation. Do you ever find that because people use social media as such a highlight reel, and as you said, to show the cutest moments and the happiest moments, that being on social media and looking at maybe all the people in your life, I'm assuming at your age, a lot of people in your age bracket have families, and does that ever trigger you in any way?
I wouldn't say that part triggers me. I get triggered by other things, but I think I feel separate from it. I think the thought that comes up for me is like, oh, I think I was supposed to have that. Oops. like kind of, to be totally honest, like that's kind of what I think when I see like, a pregnancy announcement or, things like that. I think where I get triggered about social media is around stuff like when I see couples doing stuff together. I think that I wouldn't say triggered, like that's a little bit stronger, but it's kind of like a longing feeling,
Mm-hmm.
of like, oh wow, it would be really cute to have someone hot to go ice skating with. Like, so if I fall, like whatever, he'll catch me. And then, I see people doing things like, I don't know, going upstate is like such a thing, people with their apple cider and their upstate man. And I'm just like, who are these people? I don't know. Just like me and my girlfriends, like hanging out, finding all the gluten-free bakeries, that kind of stuff. But it's not so much triggered. It's more just kind of like, oh, okay, hopefully it'll happen when it's meant to. And I think when people post a lot of kid content, as I said, like I just feel like I can't relate to it. Like I recently followed somebody I met at an event, and they were so sweet. And then I looked at their feed, and it was like all kids, like everything. They were like the kid queen.
Yeah.
It's just like I was like, girl, I will follow you, but you probably are gonna get muted real quick because I'm just not gonna
Not
get any.
interested.
I'm just not, it's not gonna nourish me on any level to
Yes.
see this over and over again. So it's more that kind of stuff.
On the note of my friend who wants to, host a yoga retreat by the sea, And on the note of your aunt who is just a cool person, what do you envision for yourself? If you think of yourself at age 60, what do you want your life to be like at that stage?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, when you said 60, I was like, "Girl, that is not that far away." I feel like it's not that far
You've
away.
got a good 20
Um,
years.
I mean, almost, not totally, but
You have
yes,
the
close.
same amount of time to 60 as I have before I get to move to the island.
Okay.
So we can talk about it then.
We can make our moves then. Um, no, so at 60, I think I mean, to be totally honest, there's a lot of what I'm doing now that I would like to still be doing. I love what I get to do every day. And so it brings me like genuine joy. And I know you can relate to that. It's like such a huge part of my own personal creative self expression. So I feel like so lucky actually that I get to do the things that I do every day. So I would like to continue like feeling creatively inspired and being able to do that and, sustain my life through doing that. But yeah, I think I'd also love to have a boo,
Mhm.
that like I can go upstate with. I have like random dreams. Like I went scuba diving actually on my honeymoon years ago in the Maldives, and it was so life changing and so beautiful. And I've not been scuba diving since because I feel like I'd love to go with like a partner and just like go to, I think in Cozumel in Mexico, there's like amazing diving schools there. And I've like always wanted to go, but it's something that I feel like, oh, I live alone. I'm always alone. I don't really feel the need to go alone to do something like that. It doesn't like fulfill a need for me, but I'd love to have a partner to do that with. As I see like my parents are getting older, I think I also just know that I want to create my own sense of family. And to me, that is different than, even though I have a lot of amazing friends, but it's different than that. It's not come and go kind of as you have time. It's something that's like more stable, more rooted, more consistent. And not saying that my friendships aren't amazing, but I do think that there's a detachment that happens with friendships that's a bit different than like if you're in a committed romantic relationship. So yeah, I don't know if that's vague, but that's what I feel when I think about, what do I want that life to be? I want to build a life with someone that, yeah, is like our wildest dreams, you
And
know?
are you actively dating people right now?
Oh, Lucy. Yes, I guess I am as of like a week ago. So,
Ooh, like one person, or you mean you just have
no,
been making the rounds?
I've been making making the rounds. Yeah, I think, I was really closed off to it, to be honest with you, for a long time, getting really devastated romantically at such a young age. I think it just had me sort of, well, I'm working on my nervous system a lot. I think it had me be in like fight or flight and just kind of want something to work that clearly like wasn't going to work. And I would sort of put up with things that were just clearly like not good for me or not just aligned with who I am in any other area of my life. And so because I had a lot of those experiences, I sort of turned myself off to even just, I was like, I'm so bad at this. Like we need to take it off the table. Like we need to just take it off the table. And then I got really sick like 2022 I had to move home to live with my parents cuz I got that condition, and yeah, it just was not on the table at all. And as my health continues to get better and better, and I feel more like vitality and all that stuff, I've been like, exploring the dating life. And also, to be honest with you, like, not even from that place of like, oh, I need to meet someone right now, because I don't actually feel that way. I feel like I just want to learn because there were so many experiences that like weren't for my highest good, that now I feel like I'm such a different version of myself that I'm like,
Mhm.
"Oh, this is interesting. Like these are the things that I like, or these are the things I don't like," from this not so fight or flight place, I guess.
I feel like after your divorce, and then specifically maybe in the last decade, is really when, from a work perspective, you've blossomed and you started a business and just things have sort of boomed for you. Where we first met was when we were both cast in that somersault campaign and we were swimsuit models together. Do you feel like not having had kids during that kind of peak time in your business was really useful for your business's growth?
I don't think it has to go hand in hand, but I do think just it's really a personal thing. I don't multitask well, actually, to be totally like, I don't. Like, even starting to date, I'm like, "Girl, like, I cannot be talking to boys, like, all night long or, like, up, like, late, on a late date. Like, I have things to do tomorrow." Like,
Yeah, you gotta get
and
to
it's
sleep.
I gotta get to sleep. Maybe someone else, like, it doesn't impact them so much, but I am a very, like, single-focused person. And so, yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I would have had the brain power or space, but personally, again, like I don't think that has to go hand in hand at all. But I just don't think I'm very good at that. I feel like I need to like I need to become a little obsessed with something in order to like create sometimes,
Mhm. Yeah.
And
It's a very
um
self-aware thing to say.
I'll put that on my Hinge profile.
One last question. We haven't touched on finances too much.
Oh.
And does having a chronic illness drain your finances? Or is it just like you need really good insurance? Or have you just spent so much money in your lifetime managing this?
Oh, Lucy, way to ask like the biggest question of all time right at the end. I personally, I'm actually going through this whole like, it's kind of like money and men thing right now.
Mhm.
And they're definitely very connected. And I'm learning all the ways that they are still. I feel just in the work that I've been doing, even just over the last like 4 or 5 years, I feel like I've talked to people who have chronic illnesses every single day. I noticed that so many of us have had a really hard time making money. It is so tied. There's so many people on disability. There's so many people who, get a hospital bill or a medical bill or have to have a surgery and then they get totally wiped out and they have to move in with their family and then they can't get a job. It's very real. And these aren't people that are like out in the middle of nowhere that you've never heard of or that like aren't thriving in some way. These are just like you and I.
Mhm.
Like this happens every single day, all the time. It starts with the system. The system of this country in particular is so skewed to have every chronically ill person be under a pile of stress and financial deficit. And so I really see that. I really believe that. I also know that you talk about this very openly. I come from a family where I have extreme privilege, even with being a woman and a woman of color and a woman with 3 chronic illnesses. I still have so much privilege. And I think about that often. And I think one of the things that had me think about that the most is even just trying to get my medication. I've been on a medication that was the medication I had to take that basically helped me start to be able to walk and like live my life. And to get this medication, I mean, the amount of hours over the years that I have had to fill out different papers, sign up for different programs. It costs $5,000 a month without insurance. Then I have to get the best insurance to be able to afford to have this be covered. Just, I mean,
Mm.
I'm probably preaching to the choir to most people. I find I am a place of privilege just because English is my first language.
Mhm.
Just because I work for myself and I can say, oh, on Monday from 9 to 12, I'm not going to book any meetings because I'm going to spend 3 hours on the phone with the insurance.
Right.
That is privilege. So I think with money and chronic illness, there's definitely a link. Again, I'm still figuring out a lot of things around it, but I think there's a lot of work to be done there.
Do you align and feel connected to the phrase of having a chronic illness, meaning that it has been difficult for you in your life to make money?
That's a good question. I think it's been complicated. I would use the word complicated versus difficult, only because there are times when I've been able to make extraordinary amounts of money, and I'm so grateful for that and proud of that. But then it sort of goes in and out because, like, for example, when I was going through all those symptoms with before I knew I had myasthenia, you know, to the outside world, there was nothing wrong. Like I was still like working and running my company and whatever, but I could barely write an email, and no one really knew that about me at the time. And at the same time, I also didn't really want to own that, to be honest with you. Right. So it's complicated. It's not like it's difficult. Like maybe I could have done some things differently. Maybe I could have gotten a more structured job or, there's different things maybe I could have done. But I think it's been complicated because there's just been genuine times where my body has just taken me out.
So much extra stuff to consider, just so much mental weight to carry around Thank you so much for coming on and for being so open with us. I know some of these topics were very personal. I was actually typing in to Google before this, just some questions that are frequent questions for someone who's choosing to be child free. And of course, it's like, here are things you don't ask about: sex, money, mental health. I'm like, oh, hello, welcome to my show.
My show where I only
Here's
ask
all we ask about. But you were incredible. And I would love for you to share with our audience where they can find you. And if you want to give a little bit of background about Chronicon in case anyone's interested in attending or learning more about it, please do.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me on. As soon as I found out that you were doing this, I'm just like, how can I be a part of the show? Because I knew it was just going to be so fun and so exceptional, and it has been. So I'm so excited that you're doing this
Thank
and
you.
that you have the show. And yeah, Chronicon. So the actual live event is happening on October 25th in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. So I hope that you will come to that, by the way. So let's see. I'll send you an email. We'll figure it out. We also have an app that people can get, which is the Chronicon community. And that's a monthly membership where I do group coaching in that. And we have nervous system work in that. We do a lot of really tangible things to support people with their chronic illnesses. It's like having your besties in your pocket and they all get what you're going through. So Chronicon on Instagram is at Chronicon Official, and I am at Nitika Chopra.
Thank you so much for tuning in to The Real Stuff. I'm Lucie Fink. Don't forget to follow the show on social media at The Real Stuff Pod. And if you're liking these episodes, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a written review. It helps the show so much. And if you're feeling called to come on the show, visit luciefink.com/apply and tell us your story. We'll see you next week for another intimate conversation on The Real Stuff.